Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Air Lift LoadLifter 7500 air helper springs on our 2014 Ford F250. Now, features are one thing, but how the truck is actually going to perform once you have the airbags installed is another. So before I put the airbags on, I put some weight in the truck and drove it around to kind of feel it out. Now that I have the airbags on, I threw the same weight in there, and I'm really curious to see how it's going to improve. So why don't we hop in the truck, run through the test course, and see how it does. So the first thing that we're going to do is straighten out a little bit here, and we're going to go over some bumps to see how our suspension feels. So let me kind of get going here. We'll hit our first couple of bumps. And actually right away, I'm pretty impressed, believe it or not. These airbags make the suspension feel like it's much more forgiving. Feels like it's a little more responsive. And doesn't feel like we're gonna bottom out or anything like that. It honestly feels like an airbag's back there. You can feel it kind of absorbing that weight and absorbing that shock, and makes it a little more comfortable inside of here. We're not getting thrown around as much, and we can focus on driving and not trying to fight the road and keep our truck straight. Now what we can do is do some evasive maneuvering through our slalom course. Now when I did this the first time without airbags and that same weight in the bed, you could really feel that weight throwing us around, and you had to kind of fight the steering wheel a little bit more to get pointed back to where you want to go. So with that being said, I'll kind of pick up a little bit of speed here and do the same thing. So after I do this the first couple times, I can tell a difference actually, even at lower speeds like I had the first time. This is much better. I feel like I could even go faster if I wanted to. I can't hardly feel that weight at all back there. It feels like the bed is empty. So major improvement, that's for sure. And I'd say this is probably where the airbags are going to shine the most. And this is probably the most realistic driving condition. At times where you go around them corners, you can feel that weight slinging you around. With these airbags on, it really solves that issue. Now, one thing I do recommend picking up in conjunction with the airbags is a compressor system. It makes your adjustments super easy, and you can do it on the fly to keep your truck nice and level. But at the end of the day, I was really surprised on how well the airbags actually helped with such a heavy-duty truck. Made our ride much more comfortable, our suspension more forgiving, and overall just a huge improvement. So now that we took our truck on the test course, let's get underneath it and have a look at the airbags themselves. So this is what they're going to look like once you have them installed. Now these are going to take place of the factory jounce bumper. Now the jounce bumper really don't provide any support. This is more or less there to prevent our truck from bottoming out, and that's really all it's going to do. And that's not the case with the airbag. The airbag is going to give us that continuous support that we need whenever we have a heavy load. And because of that, it's going to make our ride inside the truck much more comfortable, safe, and predictable. So after dealing with these bags for some time, you can tell that they're really well made. They should last a long time, and they're made right here in the USA, which is always nice. These are going to be compatible with most fifth wheel or gooseneck trailer hitches. Today we have a B&W gooseneck trailer hitch on our truck, and they work just fine with it. And since these are the XL versions, they're going to be a little bit beefier than the ones below it. So we're going to have a little more load carrying capacity. These are going to have a 7,500 pound load carrying capacity. Now keep in mind, that isn't going to add to the overall capacity that your truck can carry. It's just going to work in conjunction with it. So if you're unsure of that number, you can check your truck's owner's manual to figure that information out. Now as far as the installation goes, I'm not going to lie, it is a little involved. It does take a little bit of time. I will say, once you get one side on, the other side goes a lot smoother and should save you some time there, but you are able to get it done. You just have to be a little patient and keep at it. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and put them on together now. To begin our install, we're going to be underneath the back of our truck. Now, I would highly recommend temporarily removing the spare tire. It just gives you a lot more room to work. However, in our case, we're not able to do that because we don't have the appropriate key that lets the tire down. So we'll just kind of have to work around it. It can still be done. And then I would suggest using a pull jack to put pressure on the truck's frame. That way it will increase the distance between your rear axle and the frame. It gives you some more room to work. If you don't have one of these, what you could always do is just jack your truck up from the frame. That way the axle will hang down and accomplish the same thing. Our next step would be to remove the factory jounce bumper. Now there's one nut on top right here. It's a 15 millimeter that you can take off and this will come down. However, ours is already kind of stripped loose a little bit, and so when you try to turn the nut, this just spins. So what you could do is either try to get a big old pair of pliers to hold that steady and take that nut off. But what I'm going to do, it'll be a little faster, is just use a Sawzall to cut the stud off because we're not going to be reusing that jounce bumper. So if you do this, be sure there's no lines or anything like that. You don't want to accidentally cut off. What we can do now is get our upper bracket mounted up to our frame rail right here in this area. Now, depending on your truck setup, this process can be a little bit different. And that really just depends on if your truck has a gooseneck or fifth wheel, doesn't have one, or has a factory one. So they're all going to be just a little bit different. In our case, we have a aftermarket gooseneck. So what we need to do is remove this bolt right here that's holding on the side plate. And we're doing that because we need to utilize this bolt to hold up our top bracket. So I'm going to grab a socket and a wrench and break that free. So now that I got it loose, what I'll go ahead and do is just pull that bolt completely out. So now we can take our upper bracket and this big square hole here. We're going to take our fifth wheel hardware. I put on a big flat washer over it. That's going to go through like that. I'm going to take another big flat washer, slide that over, and then we can simply just take this and put it back through that opening. Get everything lined up here. Once we have our hardware back through, I'll just re-secure it on the other side using that fifth wheel hardware. I'm not going to tighten it down really tight. I'm just going to get it kind of snug using my hands for now. At this point, we can start to put together our whole airbag assembly. So first thing we're going to do, take your airbag. On the side that has 3 threaded holes, this one right here, we're going to take the air fitting and put that in. So we'll just get this going. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to get started correctly, so take your time. You don't want to strip this out. Once you have it, you're going to get it hand tight, and then we're going to snug it down 1.5 turns. That's 1.5. So now what we can do is grab our lower bracket cup here, And you see there's a square hole in this end. We're going to take a 5/16 carriage bolt, drop that through, make sure the bolt is laying flat on it. If we take our main lower bracket, this oval shaped hole here, we're going to put that bolt through it. Now, pay attention to your brackets. Some are side specific, so be sure to check the diagram and your instructions. Make sure you just have the right side. When we put this in, make sure you want to put it in like this, to where the side of the cup where it's coming up like this is on the side of our bracket where these tabs are facing up. So just like that. If you hold it, you can flip it over, take a flat washer and one of the thin nylon lock nuts. We're going to get that going by hand, and we're going to tighten it down. Now, we're not going to tighten it down so tight where you can't move it, but you want it to be snug. You want it to be just tight enough to where we can still kind of forcibly rotate the cup and slide it side to side. So I'll grab a 1/2 inch socket and get that done. Maybe loosen it up a little bit. So about like that is how we want it. So on our lower bracket here, we're going to have multiple holes. This one right here, what we're going to do is take our really long carriage bolt, slide that through, and what I like to do is kind of hold it flush, then just take a piece of tape and kind of tape it to it. That way it won't be so easy to accidentally come out. Just whenever we're holding this underneath the truck and getting it in place, it just makes life a little bit easier. Now we're going to take our roll plate and set it on the bottom of the airbag here, so you can see two of the holes line up with the threaded holes in the airbag. And we're going to take our bracket, and you want the side of the bracket here with the tabs facing like this to be on the opposite side as our air fitting on the airbag. So we're going to be using this hole and this one here. Those are going to line up with the two holes in our airbag. And we're going to use these flat headed bolts to secure them. So we'll try to get everything lined up. I like to just try to do one at a time here because it can be a little tricky to hold everything in position. You get a few threads going, and we can swing that around. Again, take another one of our flat-headed bolts. Get that going as well. We're going to tighten these down and then torque them to the amount specified in the instructions. So I'm just using a 7/32 Allen key. Snug them up with my driver. And then I can come back with my torque wrench and get them properly secured. So now we can grab this bracket, and what we're going to do is drop our bolts in. So this opening here that's kind of indented, we're going to take the carriage bolt that's a little bit longer, drop that through, and then on the two corners, we're going to take the carriage bolts that are a little bit shorter. So I'll set them through, and again, like I said earlier, just like to kind of put a little piece of tape there just to try to keep it in place. So I'll do that for the other carriage bolts here. Alright, now we can flip it over, and we're going to take this large spacer block, and this is going to set on this longer carriage bolt here. You can see how it's offset. The hole isn't directly in the center. You want the side that's thicker to face this way, like how I have it now. So we'll set that down for 1 second. You can move back to our airbag. the top portion here, we're going to take our roll plate and slide that on like so. And then we can take this assembly that we put together and secure it to our airbag. So I'll just slide this out of the way for now. We'll pop that back on in a moment. The holes that we're going to be using that line up with the holes in our airbag will be this one here and this one here. So this will go over like that. Then we're able to grab the corresponding bolt. We're going to put on a split lock washer and a flat washer. We'll get that one going. And I'll use that same hardware combination for this one as well. Once I have these hand tight, I'll come back with my socket and snug them down. Once you have them snug, again, you can go ahead and get them torqued to the amount specified in our instructions. Once they're torqued, don't forget to put that spacer block back on if you did remove it. So now we can take our airbag assembly and get it in place. So just to try to help you understand where the bolts are going to go, because it can be a little tricky to see. This bolt here, that's going to go through our frame rail where our John's bumper bolt was originally going through. So it'll pass right through there. Now these two bolts are going to go through the holes in our bracket that we put on. So with that being said, can lift everything up. And try to get it all lined up. Sometimes it can be difficult to get all three bolts lined up at the same time. So what you can do, if you get one of them lined up, is just very, very loosely secure it. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Where it passes through our bracket, I'm going to put a flat washer and a nylon lock nut. So I'll just get a couple threads going on it. So that'll kind of help hold it up while we can get the rest of our hardware lined up a little easier. Once we have them all passed through, I'm going to use that same exact hardware combination to secure it. The bolt that comes through the existing John's bumper hole, instead of using a flat washer and a nylon lock nut, you're actually going to use one of these flange nuts. So that's the only thing you're going to put on that bolt. So I took that lock nut and that flat washer off, and I'll replace it with this one. Now what we're able to do is tighten down all three of those nuts that we just installed. Now that we have them all tightened down, we can come back and get them torqued to that amount in our instructions. Now from this point on, any of the bolts that we torque, you can find that spec in the instructions there. Now we can go ahead and tighten down the hardware that is securing the upper bracket itself. Now we can get the side of our bottom bracket loosely secured. You're going to make sure that the bracket fits on the outside of your leaf spring U-bolt, and you want it to be as flat as you can get it against your leaf spring pack. You also want to pay attention to this cup that we installed. You're going to make sure that this is resting on the John's bumper strike plate here. So it lines up pretty good like that. So once we kind of have it in that position, we're going to take our U-bolt It's going to go around our leaf spring pack. And each side is going to come through that top hole in our plate there. Once we have both sides through like that, we're just going to take a flat washer and a nylon lock nut. We're just going to get these started hand tight on each side. Now on the airbag side, closest to the front of the truck, we're going to take our really long carriage bolt and drop it through this opening here. Now we have them both hanging down. We're going to take our axle strap. That's simply just going to line up with both of them bolts. We're going to take a flat washer and a nylon lock nut and get that started on both ends. Now we can come back and tighten down the bolts that are holding our U-bolt on. Now when you tighten these down, you want to tighten them down evenly from side to side. That way everything will pull together evenly. At this point, we can do the same thing to the bolts that's holding on our axle strap. So I'm just going to run these down nice and even. Something I want to mention, this brake line does get relatively close to the bracket here on our axle strap. So just keep that in mind when you're tightening it down. You may have to kind of bend it a little bit to just give it a little extra wiggle room. But with that being said, now what we can do is come back and torque down all of the hardware that we just tightened. So I went ahead and used the included hose clamps to secure the heat shield to our muffler here that's closest to our airbag. And we put this on there just to help protect the airbag from excessive heat. So now I went ahead and just repeated that same process over here on the driver's side to get this airbag installed. Pretty much goes in the exact same way, minus the heat shield for the exhaust. But you may have to use some zip ties and relocate some of the wiring and lines that run through here to give the airbag enough clearance. At this point, we can figure out where we want to mount up our Schrader valves that are going to inflate our bags. I'm just using a bracket I had laying around, but there's many different types of brackets available here at eTrailer, or you can mount these really anywhere you see fit. But with that being said, you're going to cut the hose in half. You're going to take a nut, thread it on that threaded portion there, and take a star washer, mount it through whatever bracket you're using. Going to take the rubber washer, push that on, a flat washer, and then we can finish it off with a hex nut. So go ahead and just run that down. Now that we have these ends mounted, we can figure out how we're going to run our air tube back to the airbag. So I'll go ahead and do that now and then show you the path that I took to get there. So I went ahead and routed those lines. We'll start with the driver's side. What I did is just route the line up along through here, along the side of our frame rail and above our spare tire. It's a little tricky to see because that tire's in the way, but just followed inside of the frame rail. You want to be sure to avoid any hot or moving parts and secure it along the way with some zip ties. There's some factory wiring there is what I secured it to. So I just continued and went right in through this opening here and plugged the end of it into the fitting on top of our airbag. So now for the passenger side airline, very similar to the driver's side. I just routed it kind of above our hitch, up and out of the way. Kind of rounds this corner here. And goes up along through our frame rail, just like the driver's side did. Now, the only difference on the passenger side is that we need to put this heat sleeve on. So this is going to help protect the airline from the hot exhaust. So before you plug it in, you want to slide that on. And something I want to mention is you want to be really careful whenever you're cutting these lines. You don't want to use a regular pair of snips because it won't cut it nice and flush. So you want to use either a tubing cutter tool, a tool like this, or a really sharp utility knife. So when you cut this, you want this to be nice and flat and straight and not have any burrs or anything like that. So cut it. If you're not happy with it, just continue to cut until you have it nice and clean. That is a good example of how it should look. And that's how you want to plug it into the fitting. So the way the line plugs into the fitting is really straightforward. Simply just line it up and push it all the way in. So once you push, you'll kind of feel it seat. And then what you can do to make sure it's connected is just lightly pull back on it. There'll be a little bit of movement, but as long as the line doesn't pop out, we know we're all good. With our airlines all hooked up, we can now go ahead and put some air in the bags. That way we can check for any leaks. Once you have air in the bags, I like to take some soapy water and spray down all the fittings where air could potentially leak. And what we're looking for is for bubbles to be rapidly forming. And if we see those bubbles rapidly forming, we know it is leaking. So on our Schrader valves, we don't have any. If we were to have some here on the Schrader valves, you'd simply just tighten down the valve itself and spray it again. We're also going to spray down the fittings on top of our airbags where our line plugs into. Now, it's a little tricky to see up there, but if those were to be leaking, what you would do is let the air out of the bags, pull that line out of the fitting, and recut it again. Make sure you have that nice clean cut, plug it back in, fill it up full of air, and check for leaks again. But that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Air Lift LoadLifter 7500 air springs on our 2014 Ford F250.